Story number 1.
It was well past midnight when Harold Avery's truck finally rolled into the remote town of Dunridge. The place wasn't even on most maps anymore. He only ended up there because his GPS glitched, and the interstate exit he took was closed behind him by an unexpected landslide. With his diesel engine rumbling low, he cruised past the sparse streetlights that flickered as if they were barely alive, and followed signs pointing toward the only motel in town. It was a rundown building with peeling yellow paint and a crooked neon sign that buzzed more than it glowed. The air was thick with the sort of quiet that didn't feel peaceful. It felt observant, like something unseen was paying close attention. Harold wasn't the type to get spooked. A lifetime of long-haul trucking taught him to sleep anywhere, trust no one, and keep a tire iron close. But something about Dunridge was off. It wasn't the empty streets or the dead silence. It was the feeling in his gut, that heaviness, like walking into a room where a fight had just happened. Still, he was too exhausted to keep driving. The clerk at the motel was an old man with glassy eyes and cracked skin. He barely looked up as Harold paid for a room. Room 6. The key was actual metal, not a card, and the tag had a faded number scrawled in marker over the original print. "You'll be gone by morning," the old man said. It wasn't a question. Harold only nodded, not really hearing him. The hallway to room 6 was dim and smelled faintly of mildew. Fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered, and the carpet squished softly under his boots. As he opened the door, the knob felt cold, colder than the air around it, and when he stepped inside, the room seemed wrong somehow. It looked normal. Twin bed, old dresser, faded wallpaper, but it was the stillness. Like no air moved here, like time didn't either. He tossed his bag on the chair and locked the door out of habit. Then he wedged the wooden chair under the knob for good measure. The mattress groaned under his weight as he sat. A trickle of sweat ran down the side of his face, and he realized there was no air conditioning, and yet the room felt too cold. He peeled off his jacket and lay down fully clothed, arms folded across his chest. His body screamed for rest, but sleep wouldn't come. The silence was so complete it had shape, density. It pressed on him. The only sound was the faint creak of the building settling. But after a few minutes, the creaking began to form a pattern, like footsteps, slow, measured. 1, 2, 3, stop. Harold sat up. He waited. The room was still. He rubbed his eyes and told himself it was just the old place shifting in the night. He'd slept in worse. He lay back down. A soft tap sounded against the wall, then another, then a dragging noise, faint but deliberate, like something brushing slowly across the floor outside the door. Harold's heart thudded. He told himself it could be a raccoon, maybe a dog. Even though he knew damn well there weren't any stray animals making that kind of noise. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, intentional. He reached under his pillow and pulled out his flashlight. He didn't turn it on yet. He listened. The dragging stopped. All was silent again. Then the doorknob jiggled. Just once. A quick, sharp rattle like someone testing it. He stood slowly and stepped toward the door, flashlight in one hand, tire iron in the other. The chair wedged under the knob hadn't moved. No shadow under the door. No sound at all now. He stood there for what felt like a full minute. Then he turned and sat back on the bed. And the moment he did, 3 loud knocks shook the door like thunder. Harold jumped to his feet and spun around, flashlight flicking on. The door trembled slightly in its frame. But when he looked through the peephole, there was no one. No hallway. Just blackness. It wasn't that the hallway light had gone out. It was pitch black, like the lens was covered. But when he opened the door, against every instinct he had, the hallway was just as it had been. Dim. Dingy. Silent. Nothing there. He closed the door again, heart pounding. Chair back in place, locks secured. He paced the room. The walls felt like they were narrowing, closing in, and the light flickered above the bed. It buzzed harder now. Then it went out. Total darkness swallowed the room. Harold's flashlight flicked on again, the narrow beam cutting through the black. He swept it across the room, walls, floor, bed, nothing. But when he turned toward the mirror above the dresser, he froze. Something was in the reflection. Not behind him, not in the room, just the mirror. A figure, pale, long-limbed. Its head tilted slightly, arms too long, fingers brushing its knees. Its eyes were just pits, black pits. It stood silently, watching him through the glass. Harold spun around, beam slicing the air, but there was nothing there. He turned back to the mirror. Still there. Closer now. He stepped forward, watching the thing's reflection get larger. Its mouth hung slightly open like it was about to speak, or scream. But when Harold shined the light directly into the mirror, the reflection vanished, not faded, just gone, as if it had never been. He backed away and sat on the edge of the bed, breathing hard. He considered leaving, just grabbing his keys and getting out. But he couldn't bring himself to open the door again. That's when the scratching started. Soft, faint, from inside the walls, behind the headboard, then to the left, near the floor, then the ceiling. It moved. Whatever it was, it moved with purpose, like it was crawling along the inside of the walls, tracing his location. He aimed the flashlight at the ceiling. Nothing. No holes, no visible gaps, just plaster. Then the scratching stopped, and a voice whispered, so close it might as well have been in his ear. "Don't look under the bed." Harold froze. His hands trembled. He didn't move for a full 30 seconds. The silence returned, but it was different now, expectant, waiting. He looked toward the edge of the bed, and he couldn't help it. He leaned forward and tilted his flashlight toward the floor. Just a glance. That's all it took. He saw a hand. White. Emaciated. Fingers long and twitching, resting inches from his boot. He leapt back and dropped the flashlight. It rolled across the floor and the beam landed on nothing. The hand was gone. He snatched up the light and scanned the space. Empty. But the mirror. The mirror was cracked now, a thin line splitting it down the middle. His reflection was still there, but it didn't move like him anymore. He lifted the flashlight. His reflection didn't. It just stood there, head tilted, mouth slowly opening. It whispered, "You looked." Then the lights exploded, a sharp electric pop, and the overhead fixture burst, showering the floor in tiny sparks. The mirror cracked further, spider webbing outward like a frozen lake, and something began to emerge from the glass. A hand, then an arm, then a face. The figure pulled itself from the mirror with slow, jerking movements, like it didn't quite belong in this world. Its mouth opened wider than seemed possible. Its skin hung loose, sagging and gray. Its eyes were pits. Harold threw the chair aside, ripped open the door, and bolted down the hall. His boots thundered on the old carpet as he raced past the rooms, none of which had numbers anymore. He hit the lobby door with his shoulder and stumbled inside. The clerk was gone. The desk was gone. No front door, no windows, just walls. The same stained wallpaper, the same flickering overhead light. He turned back to the hallway. It wasn't there anymore. Just a solid wall. His breath came in gasps now. His chest heaved. He stumbled to the corner of the room and sat, gripping his flashlight like a weapon. The air was thick again. Still. Watching. Then, from the far corner, a whisper. "We told you not to look." Something moved in the shadows. Multiple things. Crawling on the ceiling, along the walls, shapes too fast to track, thin limbs, wide eyes. Harold screamed, a deep, guttural sound that seemed swallowed by the room. Then silence. When he opened his eyes again, it was morning. He was lying in the bed in room 6. The light outside was soft and gray. Birds chirped faintly. Everything looked normal. No cracks in the mirror, no broken light, no scratches on the walls. His flashlight was beside him. Harold stood slowly, his limbs aching. His boots were clean, no broken glass, no blood, no signs of anything. He packed his bag and left the room. The clerk was back at the desk, staring blankly at a newspaper. Harold stopped. "What the hell happened last night?" The old man didn't look up. "You're lucky. Most don't come back." "What do you mean?" The man's eyes slowly rose. "Room 6 don't like company. It keeps what it can. You got out. Don't test it again." Harold turned and left without another word. As he stepped outside, he looked back at the motel. There was no room 6, just rooms 1 through 5. He drove out of Dunridge without stopping. Didn't eat, didn't look at the map, just followed the road until the sun was high overhead. But no matter how far he drove, he never quite felt alone again. Sometimes at night, when he camped in the back of his rig, he'd hear it. Scratching, a whisper. "We told you not to look." Story the end.
Story number 2.
It was almost 2:40 a.m. when Ron heard the first knock. He sat up in bed, bleary-eyed, heart sluggishly beating with the kind of sleepy confusion that only comes from being jarred out of deep rest. The knock wasn't loud. It was soft, just 3 steady taps, intentional and too slow to be the wind. He held his breath, straining to hear more. Silence. The apartment was on the second floor of an older building in a semi-industrial part of town, like not quite the suburbs, but not really downtown either. The kind of place you moved into when you were trying to save money or start over. Ron had done both. After breaking off a long toxic relationship and changing jobs, he wanted quiet, privacy, a reset. And for a while, that's exactly what the place gave him. But that knock, it came again, 3 taps. Not urgent, not desperate, just present. Ron reached over and grabbed his phone. No missed calls, no texts. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, stood up, and padded barefoot across the old wooden floor toward the living room, where the only entrance to the apartment was. The hallway light was off, but moonlight poured in from the window above the kitchen sink, casting faint blue-gray shadows across the living room floor. Everything was still. He peeked through the peephole. No one was there. He waited another moment, holding his breath. Then he slowly unlocked the deadbolt, opened the door just a crack, and looked out into the stairwell. Nothing. Just the drafty hallway with its peeling paint and the flickering fluorescent bulb down by the stairs. He closed the door, locked it again, and turned back toward the bedroom. That's when he saw it. On the floor in front of the door, a folded piece of paper. He hadn't noticed it before. Bending down slowly, he picked it up. The paper was unmarked on the outside, just a square fold, like something from a grade school note-passing ritual. He opened it. The handwriting was crude, in all uppercase letters, as if someone had written it hastily. "You shouldn't be here." Ron stared at it. There was no signature, no context, nothing else. He rubbed his eyes and let out a shaky breath, unsure if this was some prank or if his ex had somehow found him. She'd been unstable near the end, but even she wasn't the cryptic warning in the night type. And no one else really knew he lived here. He ended up staying awake until sunrise, lights on, a kitchen knife on the table next to him, trying to tell himself it was nothing. The next day at work, he could barely focus. His coworkers noticed, but he just blamed insomnia. He didn't want to sound like a lunatic. No one wants to hear about notes slipped under doors in the middle of the night. That evening, after checking the hallway again, nothing. He made sure the deadbolt was tight, the window locks secured, and tried to brush it all off. He left the note folded on the counter, like some passive-aggressive roommate that might get bored and leave if ignored. But he couldn't shake it. Something in the tone of the message, something in the quiet deliberateness of the knock, it lingered. It felt less like a warning and more like a test. The next few nights were quiet, until Friday. It was after 3 a.m. when the knocking returned. This time it was faster, 5 quick raps. Then silence. Ron sat up immediately, heart hammering. The hallway was dark again, the same moonlight spilling in from the kitchen window. He crept toward the door. He looked through the peephole. Nothing. He opened the door slowly. No one. But this time the hallway light wasn't flickering. It was off. That was impossible. It was always on. The building manager, a tired old man named Luis, was obsessed with keeping that light functional, constantly checking on it. For it to be off meant someone had killed the power. Ron looked down. Another note. This one had a new message, the handwriting even shakier than before. "Stop looking." He stood there a long time, staring at the hallway, feeling watched. The quiet wasn't normal quiet anymore. It was dense, heavy. It had a pulse. He backed into the apartment, locked the door with both deadbolt and chain, and sat with his back to the wall until dawn. On Saturday morning, he tried talking to Luis. "Has anyone been loitering around at night?" Ron asked casually, trying not to sound panicked. Luis shook his head. "No, man. Building's been dead quiet. You okay?" Ron just nodded. He didn't press further. He went to a hardware store that afternoon and bought a motion sensor for the hallway window, a second door chain, and a camera peephole attachment that synced with his phone. He set it all up before nightfall. The apartment felt like a bunker now. That night, he stayed up, determined to catch whoever it was. Nothing happened until 3:12 a.m. The motion sensor chimed from his phone, movement outside the kitchen window. He bolted from the couch and rushed in. But when he got to the window, no one. Just the same alley, the same dumpster, the same fence. He turned to look at his phone screen to review the camera footage. What he saw made him drop the phone. There was a figure in the hallway outside his door, but it wasn't a person. Not exactly. It was tall, absurdly tall, almost as if stretched. Its face was blank, no eyes, no mouth. The footage only showed it standing still in front of his door, motionless, and then, in one frame, it was gone. He replayed it 4 times. Each time it vanished in the same frame. No walking away. Just gone. He didn't sleep at all, not even a nap. Sunday was worse. The air in the apartment had changed. The lights dimmed strangely. Sometimes the ceiling fan would stop spinning, even though the switch was still on. The fridge made odd noises, like a faint whimpering, barely audible, but rhythmic, as if mimicking crying. He tried calling a friend to ask if he could stay over, just for a night, but no one answered. It was like his phone wasn't connecting properly. Texts failed. Apps wouldn't load. Only the hallway camera still worked. That night, he sat on the floor of his bedroom, lights on, door locked, knife on his lap, just waiting. At 3:34 a.m., the hallway camera buzzed. Movement detected. He opened the live feed. This time, the figure wasn't standing still. It was knocking, but not with a hand. It was pressing its head against the door. Over and over. The knocking sounds from earlier. It wasn't fists. It had been its skull. Knock, knock, knock. Then it turned, slowly, and looked directly into the camera. Even though it had no eyes, Ron felt it looking at him. And then it started to smile. It didn't have a mouth, but a grin tore open across the lower part of its face, skin splitting as if the face itself couldn't contain it. Ron dropped the phone again and backed into the corner of the room. He didn't open the door. He didn't speak. He just waited. Eventually, the knocking stopped. The apartment grew quiet again. But when he opened his eyes later that morning, the note was already inside the apartment, on the floor by his bed. We see you now. On Monday, he tried to leave. He packed everything he could carry, called a cab, and bolted for the door. But the door wouldn't open. The lock worked. The bolt turned. The knob turned. But the door wouldn't move. It was like it was fused to the frame. He tried the window. Jammed. Tried calling again. No service. Panic started to set in. He banged on the walls. He screamed. No one came. That night, he covered all the mirrors. The reflections were starting to show things that weren't in the room, like a second figure standing behind him, just out of reach. He stopped sleeping altogether. On Wednesday, the whispering began. It came from the air vents, then the drain, then behind the walls. Sometimes it said his name. Sometimes it just laughed. Other times, it would repeat the notes back to him in a voice that almost sounded like his own. You shouldn't be here. Stop looking. We see you now. He unplugged the camera, broke his phone, and shoved towels into every crack and gap in the apartment. He started talking to himself, anything to drown out the whispering, but it only made the voices louder, angrier. On Friday, something changed again. When he woke up, if you could call it sleep, he found every note pinned to the wall above his bed, stabbed in with what looked like his own kitchen knives. Beneath them, a new message had been scrawled in black ink across the wall. Now you're part of it. He tried not to read it, but his eyes kept returning to it. That night, there was no knock, no whispering, no movement, just a long silence. And then, finally, a voice, clear, right next to his ear, said, "Open the door." He doesn't remember what happened next. Not fully, but he remembers opening the door, he remembers stepping out, and he remembers that the hallway was not the hallway anymore. It stretched on forever. Ceilings too high, walls breathing, lights flickering with no source, and in the distance something moving toward him. Smiling. He doesn't know how long it's been since then. Time doesn't work right here. But every now and then, when it's quiet and he thinks hard enough, he remembers his name. And when he does, he whispers it into the vents. Maybe someone will hear him. Maybe someone else will come looking. Maybe the knocking will start again, somewhere new. Story, the end.
Story number 3.
It was nearly 2:30 a.m. when Nathan's phone buzzed violently against the hardwood nightstand. He wasn't asleep yet, though he'd been trying for hours. The city outside was still as a photograph, soaked in that grainy orange-yellow hue of scattered street lamps. Nathan had just moved into the apartment 2 weeks ago, top floor of a quiet brick complex on the edge of the city. No one above him, no noise below. That's what he liked about it. Silence. He reached for the phone, half hoping it was just a spam text. But the screen displayed a single notification. Unknown number. Stop moving. It hears you. Nathan stared at it for a second, blinking hard. No number, no context, just those 6 words. He set the phone down and let out a small laugh. Probably someone messing with him, Maybe a wrong number. He pulled the blanket back over himself and laid his head against the pillow, trying to steady his breath. But now he was listening. His apartment was dead silent. Even the usual ticking of the pipes had gone quiet. No hum of the refrigerator. Nothing. That absence of sound, that unnatural, bottomless stillness, dug in beneath his skin. The floors in this place were old. If anything moved across them, even in the hallway outside, he could hear it. And at that moment he realized just how loud even a shallow breath seemed in the quiet. He turned the phone face down and closed his eyes. Then came the knock. It wasn't on the front door. It was softer than that. Closer. Tap. Tap. Nathan sat up. It had come from inside his apartment. It was deliberate. Measured. He scanned the dark bedroom, his heart kicking in his chest. The windows were locked. The closet door was cracked open slightly, but he'd checked it earlier. The bathroom door was closed, and he always left it that way. Then he heard it again. Tap. Tap. This time, it was coming from the inside of the bedroom wall, the one that bordered the living room. Not the hallway. Not an adjoining apartment. From his wall, from inside it. He stared at the wall, frozen. The knocks came again, more insistent this time. The drywall flexed, ever so slightly, as if something behind it was pressing out, testing its strength. Nathan didn't move. Not because he remembered the text, but because his body simply wouldn't let him. His hands gripped the blanket so tight his knuckles hurt. The knocking stopped. The wall went still. Then came a new sound, a scraping. It was slow, like fingernails dragging across wood. It started low, near the floor, and moved upward, inch by inch, until it was just beside his head on the other side of the wall. That was enough. He jumped out of bed and turned on the light. The sudden flood of brightness snapped the room back into normalcy, but it didn't calm him. He walked to the wall and pressed his ear against it. Nothing. He knocked gently. Once, twice, still nothing. He stepped back, then crossed the room to the door. As he turned the handle, he paused. Something was different. The air in the hallway seemed heavier, thicker. He flicked on the hallway light. Everything appeared untouched, but something had changed. He moved into the living room, stepping quietly. The air felt colder here, as if someone had left a window open, but all were shut and locked. Then he saw something on the hardwood floor, right where the living room met the kitchen. 3 small drops of what looked like water. But they weren't wet. They were oily, dark, almost black. He bent down and touched one with his fingertip. It wasn't water. It was thick, like syrup. A sickening chemical smell rose from it. He wiped it off on a tissue and backed away, grabbing his phone again. The text was still there. He tapped it to see if he could trace the number, but it was listed as unknown, with no details. Just then, a new message arrived. Unknown number, do not go to the bathroom. Nathan's stomach twisted. The bathroom was right down the hallway. The door was still closed. He turned slowly toward it. Nothing moved. He stepped toward it, one cautious foot at a time. Each creak of the floor made his breath catch. When he got within arm's reach of the door, he stopped. The handle turned. Not quickly, not with force, but enough to show it wasn't stuck. It moved halfway down, then stopped. Nathan stepped back. The air around him buzzed, his own panic mixing with the unnatural silence of the apartment. He couldn't move. Couldn't. He just stared. The handle reset. Then it turned again, this time all the way, and the door creaked open an inch. He didn't wait. He grabbed his coat and keys, slammed the front door behind him, and ran down the stairwell barefoot. Nathan drove until he found an all-night diner on the other side of the city. He parked outside, still trembling, and stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror. Sweat glistened on his forehead. He didn't go inside. He just sat there watching the diner lights, trying to convince himself he wasn't losing his mind. At 4:07 a.m., his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. It was in the wall. Now it's in the vents. Nathan dropped the phone onto the passenger seat. He looked up at the roof of his car, as if imagining something crawling through the ductwork above. But this was a car. There were no vents like that. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. It knows you left. His chest tightened. He didn't know what was happening or who was doing this. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going back there. Not tonight. The next day, Nathan returned to the apartment just after noon. Bright sunlight poured through the windows, warming the floor and making the whole place feel like a different world. Still, he opened the door slowly, holding his breath. Nothing looked disturbed. His bed was untouched. The bathroom door stood wide open. The oily spots on the floor were gone. He walked in cautiously, checking each room. Everything seemed normal, but normal didn't mean safe. That evening, he called a contractor he found online to inspect the walls. The guy arrived just before dusk and had a snake camera with him. Nathan didn't tell him the full story, just that he'd heard scratching and wanted to make sure there were no rodents or water damage. The man drilled a small hole into the wall near the head of Nathan's bed and inserted the camera. The screen showed darkness at first, then insulation. Nothing unusual until it moved. At first, it seemed like the camera was jostling, but the man holding it hadn't moved. So a shadow passed in front of the lens, fast but unmistakable. Then, a shape. The screen went black. "What the hell?" the contractor muttered, pulling the camera out. The tip of it was broken, the lens cracked. "Could it be an animal?" Nathan asked, voice shaky. "Not like anything I've ever seen," the man said. Whatever it was, it didn't look right. He left shortly after, promising to send someone else the next day. But no one ever came. That night, Nathan stayed awake with every light on in the apartment. Around 3:15 a.m., the power went out. The lights, the TV, even the charger on his phone, everything died at once. And then from inside the walls came a sound he would never forget. It wasn't knocking, not this time. It was breathing. Heavy, ragged, wet-sounding breath, as though something huge was pressing against the wall behind his bed, exhaling with each groan of the boards. He bolted from the room and ran to the front door, but it wouldn't open. The deadbolt twisted freely, clicking without catching. He threw his shoulder against it again and again, but it wouldn't budge. Then came a new sound. From the vents, it started as a low clanging, then the sound of something crawling through them, metal bending under weight. The grating above the hallway shifted, dust falling down in small clouds. Nathan backed away. Every muscle in his body screamed to move, but his legs felt rooted to the spot. The vent above him bent downward, groaning under pressure. Then the metal burst. Something fell from the ceiling with a wet thud, a thing that didn't belong in any world he understood. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was long and pale, with limbs too thin and too many joints. Its face, if it had one, was buried beneath a twisted mess of blackened skin and thick hairless folds. It didn't see him. It heard him. The thing lifted its head and twisted it violently, like it was cracking every vertebrae in its neck at once. Then it scuttled toward him. Fast. Nathan ran. The door didn't open, so he jumped through the window. The glass shattered around him as he fell onto the fire escape. He didn't feel the cuts, only the cold air of the night rushing against his skin. He didn't stop running until he made it 2 blocks away. He called 911. He reported a break-in. That's all he could say. When the police arrived, the apartment was empty. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of anything. But Nathan didn't go back. He moved across the city the next day and never collected the rest of his things. 2 weeks later, he got another message. Unknown number. It followed the heat in your blood. The silence is how it finds you. Nathan doesn't sleep at night anymore. He listens. He keeps fans running. White noise, anything to fill the void, because when it gets too quiet, he hears it. Breathing, somewhere nearby, closer than it should be, and he knows one day it'll find him again. Story the end.
Story number 4.
The rain beat down on the rooftop of the old building as Mark sat in the dimly lit break room, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. The fluorescent lights above buzzed intermittently, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent room. It was 3:15 a.m., and he was alone. Again. His usual coworker, Sarah, had called in sick, leaving him to cover her shift at the factory. The night had been uneventful up until now. Most of the workers were gone, and the machines had long since been shut down. Mark had spent most of the shift monitoring the security cameras and checking the perimeter of the building. The occasional sound of something shifting or creaking in the distance kept him on edge, but nothing had seemed out of place. Until now. He checked his phone. No new messages, no calls. It was just the way it always went. But tonight felt different. It was as if the building itself was alive, breathing, with every creak of the floorboards and the soft hum of the lights adding to the growing tension in the air. He glanced at the clock again. It was just past 3:30 a.m. He needed to make his rounds, check the back storage area, and lock up. He grabbed his flashlight from the table, switched it on, and stepped into the hallway. The long corridor stretched before him, the stark white walls covered in patches of peeling paint. The dim light flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Mark shook his head, trying to shake off the unease creeping into his mind. He had worked this shift many times before, and nothing unusual had ever happened. It was a quiet, industrial building, old, but nothing to be afraid of. Still, tonight felt different. The silence was too heavy, too thick. It was as if something or someone was waiting for him. As he walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the empty building, he tried to focus on the task at hand. The back storage area was on the far side of the building, and it took him a few minutes to reach it. When he arrived, he pushed open the heavy metal door, the rusty hinges squealing in protest. Inside, the storage room was just as he remembered him, dusty and filled with boxes stacked haphazardly on top of each other. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves, and began walking through the aisles, his flashlight illuminating the cluttered space. At first, everything seemed normal. There was nothing out of place, just the usual mess of forgotten items and unused machinery. But then he heard it. A faint sound. A scraping noise coming from somewhere deeper in the room. Mark froze. His heart skipped a beat. He stood there for a moment, listening, but the sound had stopped. His eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of the noise. But there was nothing. The air was still, thick with dust and the smell of old wood. He took a step forward, the floor creaking under his weight. Another scraping sound, louder this time, echoed from the far corner of the room. Mark's breath caught in his throat. His flashlight beam darted toward the sound, and for a split second he thought he saw something move. A shadow, just on the edge of the light. He stepped back, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. His mind raced. It could be an animal, maybe a rat or a raccoon that had gotten in somehow. But it didn't feel like that. No, it felt wrong. The air was too still, too oppressive. Mark took another step forward, and the scraping sound came again, this time accompanied by a faint whisper. It was soft, unintelligible, but it sent a shiver down his spine. He swung his flashlight toward the source of the noise. Nothing, just boxes, empty crates, old machinery. The whisper had stopped, and the room was silent once more. But the air was thick with an unsettling presence. Mark could feel it now, a weight pressing on him from all sides. The hairs on his arms prickled. He glanced back toward the door, suddenly feeling the urge to leave. But before he could turn around, something caught his eye. A figure. At the far end of the room, near the stacks of old metal crates, there was a shape, a figure standing perfectly still, just beyond the reach of his flashlight. Mark's breath caught in his throat as he stared at it. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in a dark, tattered coat. His face was hidden in shadow, but Mark could see his eyes, wide and staring, unmoving as if he were frozen in place. Mark blinked, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure was still there, staring at him with those wide, unblinking eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, to call out, but no sound came. His throat was dry, his mouth suddenly too tight. The man didn't move. He just stood there, watching. For what felt like an eternity, Mark couldn't tear his eyes away. The room was deathly quiet, the only sound the rapid pounding of his heart. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. Mark stumbled backward, his flashlight swinging wildly as he scanned the room. The man was no longer there. The room was empty. The scraping sound, the whispers, everything had vanished. But the feeling of being watched remained. He didn't waste another second. Without thinking, Mark turned and ran toward the door. His foot hit something on the floor, sending it skidding across the room with a loud crash. But he didn't stop. He didn't care what it was. He just had to get out. He reached the door and threw it open, nearly tripping over his own feet as he sprinted down the hallway, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the empty building. He didn't stop until he reached the break room, slamming the door shut behind him. He leaned against the door, gasping for breath. His hands were shaking, his body drenched in sweat. He looked around the room, half expecting to see the figure standing in the corner, watching him. But the room was empty, silent. Mark's mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was it a trick of the light? A hallucination? He tried to rationalize it, But something deep in his gut told him that what he had seen, what he had felt, was real. And then he heard it, a faint sound, a whisper coming from the hallway. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, clearer. Mark's heart stopped in his chest. It was his name. Mark. He spun toward the door, his pulse racing. He could hear footsteps now, slow and deliberate, moving toward the break room. Mark. The voice was closer, just outside the door. Mark backed away, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He grabbed the nearest object, a metal chair, and held it up in front of him, as if it could protect him from whatever was outside. The door handle rattled. Mark froze, the chair trembling in his hands. The door creaked as something pushed against it from the other side. The voice spoke again. Mark. And then the door slammed open. Story the end.
Story number 5.
It was close to 2:30 a.m. when Olivia finally turned off the TV. Her studio apartment was dead quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the old radiator that never seemed to work quite right. She lived on the 5th floor of an aging brick building in the older part of town, where the streets narrowed and every other street lamp flickered or buzzed with static. The kind of neighborhood where you always felt someone could be watching from behind dark windows. She wasn't easily scared. 27, working nights at a hospital lab, she was used to being awake when most of the world slept. She liked the silence. No one bugging her, no cars, no shouting in the hall. But there was something about that night, something that scratched at her nerves. Maybe it was how the wind kept howling between the cracks in her windows. Or the way her lights flickered for half a second after she shut off the TV, like the power was straining. Or maybe it was because she'd woken from a dream earlier in the evening, a dream she couldn't quite remember, except that she'd felt like someone had been standing over her, just out of sight. Still, Olivia got up, locked the door, deadbolt and chain, then drew the curtains closed. She liked to sleep with the window cracked a little for air, even in cold weather, but tonight she shut it fully. She couldn't say why, just instinct. She crawled into bed, phone beside her, and let herself sink into the silence. It was maybe an hour later when she first heard the knock. Not at her door, from the wall. She sat up, blinked into the dark. The room was dim, lit only by the soft blue glow of her alarm clock. The knock came again. 3 soft taps, even, measured. She stared at the wall to her left. That side shared with the empty apartment next door, an efficiency unit that had been vacant since the guy who lived there moved out 2 months ago. She hadn't seen anyone new move in. No furniture deliveries, no noise, no signs of life. She checked her phone. 3:39 a.m., 3 more knocks. Olivia climbed out of bed, moved cautiously to the wall, and pressed her ear against it. Nothing. She waited. Then, just as she pulled away, a faint scraping sound. Like something dragging gently across the other side of the wall. Not furniture, not rats. Too smooth, too slow. She stared at the plaster. "Hello?" she said quietly, feeling stupid as she did it. Silence. Then, a single knock. Louder. Closer. Right behind her head. She jumped back, heart hammering. "Nope," she muttered, and back toward the bed. She sat on the edge, trying to listen. Nothing now. Just wind outside and the soft tick of her clock. Maybe she'd imagined it. The way the building settled, sometimes it made weird noises, and maybe someone had moved in next door without her noticing. She went back to bed, but left the bedside lamp on. Sleep came in pieces, fitful, uneasy. Around 4:20, the lamp clicked off by itself. The room went black. She shot upright. Her hands fumbled for the light switch. It turned back on with a click, still plugged in. No power outage. She felt a sudden draft and looked toward the window. It was open. Just a crack. She hadn't opened it. She was sure of it. She got up, walked over, and shut it. Locked it this time. She turned around and froze. The chain on her door was unhooked. She hadn't touched it. Her heart thudded in her chest. She walked to the door, flipped the chain back into place, and double-checked the deadbolt. Then she checked the bathroom. Empty. Closet. Nothing. Still, she didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, she asked the super about the unit next door. He said no one had signed the lease. Still vacant. She asked if he'd been in the apartment overnight for any reason. He looked at her like she was crazy. "No," he said. "You think I'm doing maintenance at 3 in the morning?" Back upstairs, Olivia stood at the wall again, knocked once. Nothing came back. That night, she stayed up watching TV until almost 4 a.m., fighting sleep. She didn't want to hear the knocks again, but sleep caught her eventually. She drifted off with the television still murmuring in the background. Sometime later, she didn't know when, the TV went silent. She woke up to a sound, a voice, right by her ear, a breathy, raspy whisper. "Are you awake now?" She bolted upright, gasping. The TV was off. The room completely dark. Her lamp, her alarm clock, everything dead. No light anywhere. She reached for her phone. The screen wouldn't turn on. She was in total blackness. And then, the knock. This time, from inside the apartment. She heard it behind her, near the kitchen. Knock, knock, knock. She froze, her hands trembling. A second set of knocks on the bathroom door. Then a third. From the closet. Panic surged in her chest. She couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Then the voice again, from everywhere and nowhere. "Where did you go?" It wasn't angry. It was disappointed. Hurt. Olivia grabbed her phone and stumbled toward the front door, groping in the dark for the chain the deadbolt. She ripped the door open, and the hallway was gone. Not dark. Gone. A flat wall stood where her door had opened. She turned back, and her apartment was different. Stretched, shadows too long, corners that didn't meet right. Her bed was there, but it was farther away. Something stood next to it. A shape, tall, thin, its head slightly cocked. She backed away, but the wall behind her was closing in. She screamed, but no sound came. The thing moved, not with step, just shifted, closer. Its arms were wrong, too long, fingers brushing the floor, no eyes, just pits. Its mouth opened and whispered, "Now you see me." Then everything snapped back. She was in bed again, the TV on, light from the window spilling in. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. 4:04 a.m., she was soaked in sweat. Her door still chained, deadbolt still locked. The window was shut. Everything normal, but she didn't feel normal. The next day, she didn't go to work. She stayed in, blinds closed, doors locked. She thought she'd had a nightmare, a vivid, waking dream. Sleep paralysis, something rational. But she didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the figure. Those fingers, that mouth, the voice. The next night, she tried sleeping in the living room. She turned every light on, slept on the couch, slept with a knife. The knocks came at 2:44 a.m. from inside the walls, from behind the TV, from under the couch. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Then the voice again, closer this time, just behind her head. "You left me alone." She turned slowly. The couch was empty, but her reflection in the window wasn't. In the glass, she saw herself still lying down, even though she was sitting up. The reflection turned its head toward her and smiled. Then she passed out. When she woke, morning light filled the room. Birds chirped outside. She checked everything. The apartment was untouched, but the mirror in the bathroom was broken. A long vertical crack. And in the middle of the mirror, someone had written a word in what looked like blood. Stay. She left that afternoon, packed a duffel bag, and got in her car. She stayed with a friend across town, told no one what happened. The next night, she heard a knock on the bedroom window. Third-floor apartment. No fire escape, just a knock and a whisper. "You promised." She moved again and again. No matter where she went, the knocks came. Always in the dead of night. Always followed by the whisper. "You saw me. You know me. You can't leave." She sleeps with earplugs now, wears a mask over her eyes. She leaves lights on all night, but every few weeks she wakes up at 3:39 a.m. and the lights are off, the door unlatched, and that soft knock just once at the center of her soul. Story the end.
Story number 6.
It started with a low creak at the edge of silence. Dylan had just turned off the TV and let the static from the speakers fade into the dead hush of 3:17 a.m. The apartment was cold in the way old buildings got when the radiators decided to sleep instead of hum. Outside, the wind bit against the window panes, rattling them softly, but it wasn't enough to drown out that creak. It was too close, too deliberate, like someone leaning just too much weight onto a loose floorboard. Dylan was used to the odd noises of the building. Unit 2C was notorious for slamming its front door at all hours, and the plumbing in the walls sang eerie lullabies when someone upstairs flushed. But this wasn't that. This sounded like it came from inside the apartment. He was sitting on the couch, feet tucked under him, half-finished mug of tea cooling on the end table. The lights were off, save for the dim glow from the kitchen stove clock. He didn't live in a dangerous neighborhood, but he didn't live in a good one either. Break-ins weren't common, but every once in a while, someone got bold. He sat perfectly still, eyes scanning the darkened hallway that led to his bedroom. The creak had come from there. He was sure of it. Slowly, he reached for the heavy flashlight he kept tucked between the couch cushions. A holdover from the time the power went out for 2 days during a storm last winter. He clicked it on. The beam cut cleanly through the dark, revealing the hallway. Nothing moved. He waited, listening. Silence. Still he got up, slowly, barefoot on the cold hardwood, and made his way down the hall. The bedroom door was open. He always left it open, and the room looked undisturbed. He swept the flashlight across the bed, the closet, the corners. Nothing. But as he turned to leave, he caught something in the corner of his eye. The closet door. It was open just a few inches. He always kept it closed. Not because he believed in monsters or ghosts, but because it was just habit. Something about seeing it open in the middle of the night made him hesitate. He stepped forward, exhaled slowly, and reached for the doorknob. He pulled it open with a jerk, as if doing it quickly would startle whatever could be hiding inside. Nothing. Just clothes. Shoes. An old box of books. He laughed a little at himself and shut the door again. He turned off the flashlight and walked back toward the living room, already feeling stupid for making a big deal out of it. He was halfway to the couch when he heard the whisper. It wasn't loud. In fact, he thought he might have imagined it. But then it came again. Clearer this time. Just one word. Wait. He stopped, turned around slowly. The hallway was black again, but the kitchen light behind him lit part of it. He waited, heart thudding. Nothing. He stared into the darkness for what felt like minutes, then turned around again to go back to the couch. And that's when he noticed the closet door was open again. Wide this time. All the way open. He hadn't heard it. He should have heard it. The old wood creaked when it moved. He turned back to face it, flashlight ready, but he didn't switch it on. He wanted to listen. The air was heavier now, like the way the air gets just before a storm when it's dense and heavy with pressure. "Hello?" he said, hating how weak his voice sounded in the dark. Silence. He took a cautious step forward, but before he could reach the bedroom, he heard something else. Breathing. Slow. Heavy. Rhythmic. Coming from the closet. He turned the flashlight back on. The beam hit the closet directly, and there was nothing. No one. No movement. The breathing stopped. Dylan didn't go back to bed that night. He stayed on the couch, light on, eyes wide, the flashlight still gripped in his hand. He told himself in the morning he'd laugh about it, that it was just his mind playing tricks on him after too many horror shows. Maybe sleep deprivation. He hadn't slept well in weeks. But he didn't laugh in the morning, because when he went into the bedroom after the sun had risen, he found something on the closet floor, a single, crumpled photograph. He picked it up, confused. It wasn't one of his. The photo was old, the color faded into a yellowed hue, and it showed a woman standing in a hallway, staring at the camera, her face expressionless. Her eyes were sunken, mouth flat. Something about her looked off, like the proportions of her body weren't quite right. On the back, written in shaky pencil, were the words, "Do not look at her." Dylan stood there, the breath caught in his chest. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't something he could rationalize. He threw the photo away, but that night he couldn't sleep again. And the next morning, when he woke up, dozing off briefly at dawn, he found the photo was back, on his nightstand, face down. Same words on the back. He didn't touch it this time, just stared at it for a long while, stomach turning. Then he grabbed his phone and took a picture of it, sent it to his sister, asking if she'd ever seen it before. She wrote back an hour later, "Why would you send me this? You know she used to be in my dreams. I told you that when we were kids." He stared at her message, mouth dry. He had no memory of that. But then he thought back. She had said things when they were younger. Things about a lady in the hallway. Someone who stood at the foot of her bed. Dylan had chalked it up to childhood nightmares. Everyone had them. But now it felt different. He went back into the bedroom, picked up the photo carefully, not turning it over this time, and slid it into a drawer. He didn't want to see her face again. That night, just past 3 a.m., he heard footsteps, not just a creak or groan, actual footsteps, heavy, deliberate, walking down the hall toward the living room. He lay still on the couch, paralyzed. The footsteps stopped just outside his field of vision. Then the breathing started again. Not his, Not close, but not far either, like someone just around the corner, standing still. He sat up slowly and reached for the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark. No one. He turned the light off again just for a second, and saw her. Standing in the hallway, in silhouette, her head tilted, arms hanging limp at her sides. The outline matched the woman in the photo. Perfectly. He turned the light back on. Gone. His chest hurt, his vision blurred at the edges. The rest of the night passed without sound, but Dylan didn't close his eyes once. The following day, he called a friend, a guy named Rob who worked maintenance for the building. Asked him to come check the apartment for any structural oddities, maybe old crawl spaces, hidden vents, anything that might explain what he was experiencing. Rob came by that afternoon, checked the closets, the bedroom, even lifted up a few floorboards in the closet with tools he'd brought. And then he stopped. Beneath one of the boards, buried beneath an inch of dust, was a small hole. It wasn't large, maybe the width of a grapefruit, but it went deeper than the apartment's foundation should have allowed. Rob dropped a marble into it. They never heard it hit the bottom. Rob looked disturbed, more than Dylan expected. "You should seal this up, man," Rob muttered. "Like, now." That night, Dylan tried to ignore it, tried to watch TV, tried to make food. But at 3:15 a.m., the power went out. Everything. Total silence. The darkness in the apartment didn't feel like normal darkness. It felt alive. He grabbed the flashlight again, but this time the batteries were dead. New ones, installed that morning. And then the whispers started again. "She sees you now." He ran for the front door, yanking at it. Locked. He twisted the knob hard. It wouldn't budge. He heard footsteps again, slow and dragging, coming up from behind him. He didn't turn around. He didn't move. The whisper came directly against his neck this time. "Do not look at her." The next morning, when the power returned, the door unlocked easily. Nothing broken. No sign of forced entry. The hole in the closet had been sealed. But the apartment felt wrong. It was no longer his. He moved out the next day, left the furniture, the photo, everything. Found a new place across town, told no one the real reason. But some nights at 3:17 a.m., he still hears the faint sound of breathing from inside the walls. Story the end.
Story number 7.
The night was quiet. Too quiet. Lena had always loved the silence of the countryside. How peaceful it was, how it felt like the world slowed down when the sun went down. After years of living in bustling cities, this cabin in the middle of nowhere was a welcome retreat. She'd rented it for the weekend to escape the stresses of her work life, the endless emails and phone calls, just a few days to herself. No distractions. But now, as she sat on the edge of the couch, her phone barely lighting up as it buzzed on the coffee table, Lena felt a strange unease in the air. She couldn't explain it. Nothing was inherently wrong, and yet everything seemed off. The first time she felt it was when she'd arrived at the cabin. The long dirt road leading up to it had been lined with towering trees, their twisted branches stretching overhead like dark skeletal fingers. She thought it might be the storm clouds gathering, heavy and gray, or the silence that followed the sudden absence of birds. But there was something else, a sensation that crawled under her skin. At first, she chalked it up to nerves. She had driven alone for hours, the last stretch through winding back roads where the nearest neighbor was miles away. She'd seen no other cars for miles. The isolation should have been calming, but instead it seemed suffocating. Now, several hours into her stay, Lena's thoughts drifted back to that sensation, the way it felt like someone was watching her, just beyond the edges of her vision. She was still trying to shake it off when she noticed it again. The silence was deeper than it should be. Too deep. There was no sound of wind or the usual creaks of the house settling into the night. No insects outside, no rustling leaves, no cars driving by. Just nothing. Not even the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The house itself was old. Wooden beams, faded wallpaper, and creaky floors. She'd explored every room earlier, and nothing had seemed out of place. It was just a small 2-bedroom cabin with the standard rustic charm, cozy, with mismatched furniture and a fireplace in the corner. But now, in the stillness, the house seemed too large. She felt too small in it. She wrapped her arms around herself and tried to ignore the hairs standing up on her neck. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was in the house, someone who wasn't supposed to be there. The buzzing phone broke her reverie, but it was just another unknown number. She didn't pick up. It had been happening all day, calls from strange numbers with no messages left behind. It could have been a wrong number or worse, a telemarketer, but it unsettled her all the same. With a sigh, she turned her attention back to the window. The rain had started falling in thick, heavy sheets, the sound of it tapping against the glass strangely soothing. But then something caught her eye. A figure. It was brief, almost imperceptible. A shadow moving past the window, slow and deliberate. She blinked, convinced she'd imagined it, but the hairs on the back of her neck prickled, the unease settling in her gut. There was no one else here. She had driven up alone. Her thoughts raced as she got up and moved toward the window. She pulled back the curtain and looked out into the darkened yard, trying to peer through the sheets of rain. Nothing. She felt foolish, but the feeling of being watched lingered like an invisible weight pressing down on her. Slowly, she stepped back from the window and returned to the couch, where her phone sat like a silent reminder. The room seemed colder now, and the shadows longer. Her mind wandered back to the strange calls. What if they weren't random? What if someone knew she was here? The thought struck her like a cold shiver, but she quickly dismissed it. She was overthinking. It was probably just the isolation getting to her, the way too much silence could play tricks on your mind. She grabbed the blanket off the back of the couch and curled up with it, trying to settle into a more comfortable position. But the tension in her chest wouldn't go away. Her eyes kept darting to the window, then the door, then the dark hallway that led to the bedrooms. Every small creak in the floorboards sounded like footsteps. But she wasn't alone. The phone buzzed again, and this time, she didn't hesitate. She picked it up, but before she could even check the number, she noticed the text message that had come through. It was short, almost casual. "I see you." She felt her heart skip a beat, and an icy chill washed over her. There was no number, no way to trace who had sent it. It felt wrong. Too personal. Her hands trembled as she clutched the phone, staring at the message like it might suddenly come to life and crawl out of the screen. Lena stood up, her legs shaky. She moved to the door, locking it and then checking the deadbolt. She didn't know why she was so shaken, but she had the overwhelming sense that she wasn't alone anymore. Her mind raced, trying to find an explanation, but all she could think about were the strange, unsettling thoughts that had started to flood her mind. What if there really was someone out there? Watching? Waiting? Her phone buzzed again. She hesitated before reading the message. "It's already inside." The blood drained from her face as her throat tightened. It couldn't be real. This had to be some sick joke. She dropped the phone onto the couch and moved to the kitchen, hands shaking as she fumbled with the cabinet to find a knife. The house felt too still. The silence was deafening. And then, as if on cue, a soft knock echoed from the front door. Her heart stopped. No one could be out there. No one had been on the road for hours, and besides, no one knew she was here. She hadn't told anyone about her weekend plans. There was no reason for anyone to show up. Another knock. Louder this time. She grabbed the knife and held it tightly, her breath shallow as she made her way to the door. The world outside the glass was nothing but a blur of rain, dark and thick. The knock came again. This time she couldn't ignore it. She reached for the doorknob, her fingers freezing against the metal. She didn't want to open it, but the curiosity gnawed at her. Her entire body screamed for her to run, but she couldn't tear herself away. Her hand lingered over the door. Then, just as she was about to turn the knob, a sound came from the hallway behind her, a scraping, slow and methodical, like fingernails dragging across wood. She spun around, knife raised, but there was nothing there. The hallway was empty. Her eyes darted back to the door, and then for a split second she saw something. A shadow. It wasn't a person. It was long and twisted, stretching unnaturally across the floor like something far too large for the space. Then it disappeared, vanishing into the darkness. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what was happening, didn't know who or what was outside or inside, but she wasn't staying to find out. Lena ran for the back door, but as her hand reached for the knob, the lights flickered. Then they went out completely, leaving her in pitch-black darkness. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she turned back toward the hallway, the sound of the scraping growing louder now. closer. A heavy, wet sound that came from somewhere deep within the walls. She didn't look back. She ran. The door, the yard, the forest. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get as far away as possible. The rain soaked through her clothes as she stumbled through the woods, heart racing, lungs burning. She could still hear it, something in the distance, moving through the trees behind her. And the phone. The buzzing stopped. Then a final text arrived. "We're watching." Lena couldn't see the road anymore. She couldn't see anything except for the growing darkness around her. She didn't even know if she was heading toward the right direction or if she was running farther into the unknown. It didn't matter. She just had to keep running. Story the end.
Story number 8.
It had been a long night, the kind that stretched on endlessly with no end in sight. Tyler was on his usual overnight shift as a maintenance technician at the old industrial plant. The place was mostly abandoned now, with only a few late-night workers around to operate some of the automated machinery and keep an eye on the lights. The plant had once been a bustling factory, but that was years ago. Now the machines were outdated and most of the building was closed off, used for nothing more than storage. Tyler had been working there for 3 months, and in that time he had gotten used to the oddities. The constant hum of machines in the background, the flickering lights in certain areas, and the strange sounds that echoed through the walls in the dead of night. But tonight, there was something different in the air, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He stood near the main control panel, watching the blinking lights and checking the readings on the monitor. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the monitors and the occasional flicker of the overhead fluorescent lights. The building was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the machinery. Outside, the rain poured down relentlessly, pounding against the windows and creating an eerie, constant drumming noise that seemed to permeate the entire plant. Tyler checked the time on his phone. 2:35 a.m., the night was dragging on, and he had another 4 hours left before his shift ended. He yawned and stretched, deciding it was time to check the building's perimeter. He grabbed his flashlight from the desk and made his way out of the control room. The long, narrow hallway was dark, and the sound of his boots echoed off the concrete floors. He clicked on the flashlight, its beam slicing through the gloom. The building was cavernous, with long hallways stretching in every direction. Tyler had gotten used to the maze-like layout, but it was still easy to get turned around, especially in the dark. He made his way toward the back of the building, where the storage rooms were located. As he walked, the air seemed to grow colder, a chill settling around him despite the fact that the heating system was supposed to be working. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Every so often, he would glance over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing just out of view, but there was nothing. The storage rooms were at the end of the hall, behind a thick metal door. The lock clicked open easily, and Tyler stepped inside, shining his flashlight over the rows of old equipment and crates. The smell of dust and rust filled the air, and the only light came from his flashlight, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. He started walking through the aisles, checking the old equipment and making sure everything was in its place. The place was a mess, with boxes piled high and machines that looked like they hadn't been used in years. As he moved further into the room, a strange sound reached his ears. At first it was so faint he wasn't sure if he had imagined it, but then it came again, a soft scratching noise like fingernails against metal. Tyler froze, his flashlight beam wavering as he scanned the room. The scratching stopped, and for a moment everything was still. He exhaled slowly and chalked it up to the wind, or maybe an old pipe settling in the walls. But as he started walking again, he heard it again. This time, it was louder, closer, as if something was moving in the dark, just beyond his reach. He whipped around, his flashlight sweeping the room. Nothing, just rows and rows of abandoned equipment. The scratching sound stopped again, and the silence felt oppressive, thick with something he couldn't identify. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to calm down. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. But then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it. A shadow. Moving. Tyler's heart skipped a beat. He turned his head sharply, shining the flashlight toward the corner. The beam caught on an old wooden crate stacked in the farthest corner of the room. The shadow had disappeared, but Tyler could have sworn he saw something shift behind the crate. Something tall, something humanoid. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead as he stepped closer, his breath coming faster. He kept his flashlight aimed at the crate, his hand shaking slightly. The air around him seemed to grow even colder, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. As he reached the corner, he hesitated for a moment, then cautiously crouched down behind the crate. There was nothing there. Tyler let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. His hands were trembling. He straightened up and turned to leave, telling himself that it was just his mind playing tricks on him. But then the scratching sound returned, much louder this time. It came from right behind him. He spun around, but there was nothing there. The room was empty. But then something caught his eye. At the far end of the room, near the back door, the dim light of the emergency exit sign flickered. The door, which should have been securely locked, was slightly ajar. Tyler's stomach sank. He had checked the door before leaving the control room. It had been locked. He knew it had been. He hadn't heard anyone come in. But the door was open now. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but he had to check. Slowly, he made his way toward the door, his flashlight shaking in his hand. As he got closer, he noticed something strange. There on the floor in front of the door was a trail of wet footprints. The rain had been pouring down outside, but no one had come in. Not that he had heard. He bent down to inspect the footprints. They were fresh, the water still glistening on the concrete floor. They led toward the door, then stopped abruptly as though whoever had made them had vanished into thin air. A cold chill ran down his spine. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him, the loud noise echoing through the empty room. Tyler spun around, his heart racing, but there was no one there. Just the echo of the door, the silence, and the unnerving sense that something was terribly wrong. The lights above flickered again, then went out entirely, plunging the room into complete darkness. Tyler's flashlight flickered and died, leaving him in pitch-black silence. A sound, the soft, shuffling sound of footsteps, came from behind him. He turned quickly, but again, there was nothing. His pulse pounded in his ears as he stumbled backward, trying to make his way toward the door. But the footsteps didn't stop. They were getting closer, moving faster now, echoing through the dark room. Tyler's breath came in ragged gasps. He had to get out of there. His hands fumbled for the door handle. He twisted it, but it was locked. He pulled harder, but the door wouldn't budge. The footsteps were right behind him now, so close that he could feel the chill of the air moving with them. Panicked, Tyler shoved his shoulder against the door, throwing his full weight into it. It creaked open just enough for him to squeeze through. He stumbled out into the hallway, his heart hammering in his chest. But as he looked back, he saw it. A figure, tall, gaunt, and hunched, standing in the doorway. The figure's face was obscured, but Tyler could make out its long, bony fingers reaching toward him. He ran. He didn't stop until he reached the main exit, slamming the door behind him and stumbling into the rain-soaked night. He gasped for air, his chest tight with fear. His eyes darted around the empty parking lot, half expecting to see someone following him. But there was nothing. Tyler never returned to the plant after that night. The company tried to contact him, but he was never found. His shift records showed that he had left early, but no one could explain what happened to him. And the plant? It stood empty, silent, as if waiting for someone to return, waiting for something to come. Story the end.